Good afternoon or good morning, and welcome to our 2020 webinar series and today's session on community-driven policy advocacy, upholding the dignity of immigrant children and families. We are so excited to have you with us. I am Rhonda Alexander, and I'll be your moderator for this session. Just want to start with a quick outline of what we're going to do today. We'll start with a welcome and an overview. And we'll hear a little bit about Vital Village Networks, hear from some amazing speakers around community-driven policy advocacy, have a little bit of time for Q&A, and then we'll close out right at the top of the hour. So we have a jam-packed hour, so we're going to keep moving along. Little housekeeping. If you are interested in listening on our Spanish language line as we practice language justice, please see the screen here for the number to dial in. We will be recording this webinar, so all slides and the recording will be available on the Now Forum and networksofopportunity.org. I'll ask that you continue to mute your audio when you're not speaking. You can submit questions on the dashboard, and you can also use the chat box for comments. And here's a quick screenshot of where you can submit your questions. Submit them throughout, and we will make sure to get to them towards the end. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Renee Boynton-Jarrett, to tell us a little bit more about Vital Village Networks.
Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. It's great to be together for this incredibly important and timely discussion. We look forward to your questions, your thoughts, and your solutions and ideas. Vital Village is a network of residents and community-based organizations that focuses on maximizing child well-being. As a network, we work to improve community capacity to promote child well-being through research and evaluation, through network alignment and coalition building, and through service learning and leadership models to promote community-led solutions. Through this work, we've been able to expand and grow networks of opportunity for child well-being, also known as NOW, which is working nationally with partners such as those who will be joining us for this webinar and those of you on the phone to really promote equity for children, both for health and educational outcomes that we know is sorely needed. I'll turn it back over to Rhonda to share more about some of our really exciting upcoming opportunities to connect.
Thank you so much, Renee. We are so excited about this year's National Community Leadership Summit. Please register. Early bird registration is closing soon and spots are filling up. We would love to have you. It's 100% virtual, and we hope to see you there. I also would love to invite you to, if this is your first time with us, check out the Now Innovation Forum at networksofopportunity.org. You can find past webinar recordings, podcasts, all of that, stories, blogs. We'd love to have you join us there. Also, we are so excited. If you've been with us for a while, you know that we host a podcast called In the Arena with Now. Today marks the launch of the airing of our first Spanish bilingual episode. The episode transcripts are available in English. You can find us anywhere you get your podcast. So Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, all of the places. You'll get to hear from Adelante around the movement towards language justice and equity. So we'd love to have you join us there. I also want to share that we have been working on a fantastic tool called our Child Wellbeing Tracker. And if you are interested in collective data sharing to demonstrate parent and family engagement, specifically during COVID-19, feel free to check out the link that's just been posted in the chat box. But here's a little bit about what the Child Wellbeing Tracker does. We focus on data sharing and collectively measuring what parent and family engagement look like. If you're interested in joining us, click the link in the chat box. We'll make sure you get the survey. So with that in mind, it is just about time for me to share with you and introduce you to our featured speakers. We'll be hearing today first from Angela Kelly, with the Boston Immigration Justice Accompaniment Network, or BIJAN, followed by Cindy Leo and Wendy Meron of Kids in Need of Defense, or KIND. And then we'll finish out by hearing from Liza Schwarzwald at the New York Immigration Coalition. So I am going to turn it over to Angela to tell us a little bit more about her work. So Angela, welcome.
Thank you so much, Rhonda and Renee, and to everyone at Vital Villages and Now and all here for your powerful work to support families and communities. I'm grateful to be here with the Boston Immigration Justice Accompaniment Network. We are a very grassroots local effort to reduce the harm of our immigration system as it plays out in the Boston area, where we are particularly focused on accompanying people who've been incarcerated by ICE and or are facing deportations, as well as their loved ones. And while our acronym appears as BEYOND, we often pronounce as BIJAN, we often pronounce it as BEYOND, which is our nickname and also our reminder to us that we are working together for a future in which all people and families can move safely and migrate and connect beyond militarized borders and beyond the oppression and separation caused by jails and prison walls. And this work also invites us to find new ways to offer solidarity that may go beyond what we're used to or beyond our comfort zones. And certainly the past few months have been a time of adaptation beyond the familiar for all of us. So these are the values that guide us in that work. We're just a few years old as a network. We actually have no paid staff, no formal office. We function through decentralized teamwork and a lot of Google Docs, but what guides us and grounds us and helps us make tough decisions together are these core values. So I'd like to share them. We honor people's dignity and choices in a system that denies dignity and choice. We expect messiness, confusion, and discomfort in this work, and we also choose courage and trust in the midst of that. We judge the system, not people. We fight for one another as family because we believe we are. So we don't always know the way forward in this work, but these are the values that are our guideposts across our network as we move forward together. And on the next slide, you'll see an image from one of our early gatherings. Back when we were able to gather in person, we would also begin with a practice of decorating butterflies in honor of people who couldn't be in the room with us, but who are in our hearts. And making butterflies in honor of people who are incarcerated or been deported was a way to bring them into the space. So I wanted to start with this image because that's how Beyond began, with the insight and experiences of people who were detained. So much of what we do now grew out of conversations with people in immigration jail who were already organizing inside to provide solidarity to one another. And they let us on the outside know how we could show up in response. So on the next slide, you'll see some of those ways. This is a common flow of our efforts, but it is not a linear process, and there's certainly no one size fits all approach to the accompaniment that we offer. Each situation is unique, and also policies keep shifting, which we tend to call the weaponized chaos of ICE bureaucracy. But much of what we do begins in this top corner with being in touch with people while they're detained. And through those connections, we often hear about people's needs for legal support. Our understanding is that only about 10 to 15% of detained immigrants have access to legal counsel, so we try to connect people with low bono or pro bono attorneys, and also to equip people with information to represent themselves when needed, for example, by mailing pro se packets and other documents to jail. And prior to COVID, we were able to physically accompany people to their immigration hearings. We've been at more than 1,000 immigration hearings in the last couple of years, sending teams of volunteers to be in court to provide emotional support, to help with transportation or childcare for family members, sometimes to present documents to the judge. And we were always there to serve as eyes and ears on an unjust system and to let court officials know that we are watching. That's become more complicated now that a lot of all detained hearings in Boston are happening telephonically, and non-detained hearings are just starting to open up again, but we do still try to accompany people before and after their hearings, and we do still accompany people in person to their ICE check-ins. And if someone gets released on bond or has a positive bond hearing, we kind of move across the bottom of this flow chart to help them raise their bond, coordinate making that bond payment so that they can get out of jail and be reunited with their families. We've helped pay bond for more than 230 folks in the last 2.5 years. And since many of you may be service providers, one way that you can help in that process that we have found really helpful is to present letters to judges showing the services that are available in the community. That has increased people's chances of being released on bond if we know that we can make those connections. So once people get released on bond, there are some immediate post-release supports that we try to provide, like rides, supplies. People sometimes are released without much material support at all. Sometimes people need housing or a sponsor to be found as a condition of their release. And we have a policy of not making any promises, but we try very hard, and through this work, we have arranged home hospitality for about 70 individuals and families to support them in getting out of detention. And then over the long term, we try to stay connected and build a sense of community where we can keep supporting one another across the network, help each other navigate access to various resources and services. In some cases, people have formed really tight bonds with the folks who have supported them in this process, and we go to each other's birthday parties and baby showers and navigate life events together. And really, it's people who have been detained themselves who offer the strongest support to others who are just getting out of detention and helping one another find work or housing. So we really appreciate the ways that people bring their lived experience to support others in the network. And we hope that all of these efforts lead us towards a world where actually none of this is necessary, because we would like to see the intersecting violence and racism of mass incarceration and immigration enforcement be abolished. We really feel it's not enough to offer solidarity to people navigating these systems without also working to dismantle the most oppressive institutions that create them. So while a lot of our work is to reduce harm within the system, doing that also helps us build the relationships and the conviction to do transformational organizing in coalition with many other groups who are leading this work. So we'll share a little bit more about that later. But onto the next slide. Given today's theme, I wanted to highlight some of the impacts on children and families. We've met so many families along the way with children who've been adversely impacted by their parents being detained or deported. And many of those families have also become active in supporting others and helping shape our network. This picture here was shared with permission of a mother reuniting with her 3 kids after they fought really hard for her freedom. So most of the folks incarcerated by ICE in Boston, in the Boston area, are adult men, but some are actually very young adults and do qualify for immigration relief as unaccompanied minors. And we also know that many of those individuals that we meet of all ages are themselves parents, or they may be elder siblings to children in their families, and that families, are with their loved one of all ages detained or deported are experiencing significant loss and distress in that process. So we think it's important to widen the frame of family separation to include all families who can't be together because they've been separated by borders or detention or related injustices. And some of the images that really stay with me about the impact on children are being in immigration court with families and seeing young children reach out for their parent who is there for a hearing. Maybe their parent is appearing in chains for an immigration hearing or only appearing on video screen, and that is the only way they may get to see their parent for months or years if it's a deportation hearing. So in thinking about today's theme, it felt important to me to bring in the voices of people in our network who most directly experienced some of this. These are a few leaders in our network who are now out of immigration jail and have spoken publicly at events. You can hear more testimonies directly on our Facebook page, which is linked there. The letter in the middle is written by people in immigration jail telling us about how they have supported one another in the process. And so I wish that all of these folks could be speaking with you today, but given many obstacles to that, I reached out to some parents in our network to get their thoughts on this topic and wanted to share some of their words with you. So first is from a young woman seeking asylum who actually gave birth at Boston Medical Center last year. So shout out to all of you there creating accessible places to receive care. And when she was asked about today's theme, she said, "My opinion is that the racism of federal authorities towards Black people and immigrants must end, and that is the future I most urgently hope for. The people of Beyond have done a lot for us, and we do what we can to help each other, but we need political change for our lives to change. Many things are not easy for us right now. We've come from our country where there was no work and much violence, and now find ourselves in another country where we are treated just as badly. This is what we need to change." Another young man who's a parent of 2 young children, and he came to the US himself as a child, offered these words. He said, "For many of us, getting access to information is not easy, even for my family, which is bilingual. For example, when I've gone to get medical care for myself and my children, I got emergency health insurance, but it's not always clear to me what it covers and doesn't cover, and I know there's a lot it doesn't cover, including dental care. If immigrant parents don't have access to comprehensive health insurance, that's a problem for our children because they need us to be healthy and well, especially right now. Sometimes I think there may be more resources out there for my family, but it takes time to do that research, and the information I find is not always easy to follow up with. Being detained by ICE a few years ago also had a huge impact on my family. My oldest son was just a baby then, and now that he's almost 4, I see how it affected him and how much fear he picked up from my experience. My kids always worry something will happen to me again, that I might get picked up by police. They're confused, are police supposed to protect them, or will they do something bad to us? Sometimes really simple things like moving my partner's car brings up a lot of fear for my family, because what if I get picked up again? The thing I hope for the future is that we can teach our children values of kindness and empathy without having to worry about teaching them to fear and stay safe from systems that discriminate against immigrants and people of color. I want to focus on them having happy lives and futures and being good people in the world, but that is not so simple right now. So there's actually a lot more I can read, but I know we're short on time. So I just wanted to draw from these voices the call for social and political transformation. And I just wanted to touch on how that is taking shape at this very transformative time with the pandemic. As we move into the next slide, you can see some of the focus of our work during COVID has really been with the movement to free them all. As the pandemic has spread across jails and prisons and detention centers, a huge focus of our work has been to get as many people out as possible, knowing that many people are exposed to the virus there, and that many people are organizing, including in immigration jails in Massachusetts, for their own health and human rights and solidarity with one another. And you can see more coverage of that on our Facebook page as well. If we move on to the next slide, some of the other things we're doing to support people during COVID who are now out of immigration detention is to build more systems to check in with folks during the pandemic. We know many people have lost jobs, some have been sick, many have been exposed in different ways. So we set up a buddy system network to phone bank and check in and see what people need. One person in our network who was detained and helped shape the creation of this system suggested that we also come up with more material supports in that process of check-in. So each person that we reach, we offer a gift card for groceries. We've mailed dozens, if not hundreds, of handmade masks for protection, and we've created new partnerships to make referrals for rent grants and other financial assistance that people may need as a result of the pandemic. And on to the next slide, we are not only adjusting to life in COVID, but we're also adapting our work to this powerful moment of uprising for racial justice. We know that the infrastructure that leads people to get incarcerated by ICE and deported is very much intertwined with the same systems of racist policing and mass incarceration. This graphic on the left, I don't know how clearly you can read it, but it shows that the Boston Police Department budget is 4 times larger than the Public Health Commission and 473 times larger than the budget for the city's office focused on immigration support. So as we keep on moving down to the next slide, I'll just mention some of the ways that we're building capacity to do more intersectional organizing and coalition building on these issues at this time, trying to bring more of a focus into our work on defunding police, reinvesting in communities, stopping surveillance. And we're also, like everyone, trying to connect in community in new ways using Zoom and WhatsApp chats. And one way we're doing that, you can see an example of on the next slide, which are community action circles we've been hosting. These are just a couple of snippets of slides. We've been using Google Slides as a way to create interactive space where many of us can get together online and kind of, drag little images across the screen. For example, sit in a circle or show on the map where we're located or show who we're bringing into the space with us. And we move through some slides of political education, and then we move through taking action together. We'll put on some music and everyone will start signing some petitions or making calls to legislators or writing to their city councilor. And so on the next couple of slides, as we move towards closing, these highlight some of the campaigns that our friends and partners in the wider movement are leading in the Boston area that we are trying to amplify through this increased capacity we want to build for organizing and collective action. Two here that I'll highlight that really relate to impacts on youth and young people are the Student Immigrant Movement and the Muslim Justice League, both of whom are leading work to stop the school to prison to deportation pipeline and try to disrupt the ways that surveillance systems and quote gang databases are tracking a lot of young people to experience these harms. And I know there are counterpart campaigns in many communities, so I hope you will consider linking up with what's happening in your area. And on the next slide are just a couple examples of campaigns that really have a focus on impacts on families. For the last 2 weeks, people have been camped out at the Massachusetts State House to try to win the passage of driver's licenses for all through the Worker and Family Mobility Act, which would limit the ways in which people end up in immigration detention or deportation because of driving without a license charges. The Families for Justice is Healing movement also convenes the Building Up People, Not Prisons coalition, which we're a part of, and Families for Justice is Healing is led by formerly incarcerated women and their loved ones, leading us into a lot of work to decarcerate and reduce the harm of these systems. One thing we're pushing for the passage of right now, which I know is also happening in many communities, is access to no-cost phone calls from jails and strengthen visitation as one way to reduce the harm of separation to families and children by systems of incarceration, including by ICE. So on the last slide, I will just give you my thanks for your time, my thanks for all that you are doing to build a more just world where children's well-being is not compromised by these systems of injustice. This is our website, our social media links, as well as our hotline for support if you know anyone that needs it. And I will also share my email address in the follow-up. I'm happy to connect with any of you. We always welcome new volunteers and new folks to get involved in the Boston area. And if you are joining from elsewhere around the country, I'd encourage you to connect with the local bond fund and immigration accompaniment network in your area. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Angela. And don't worry, we'll have some time for Q&A in just a little bit. I'm going to turn it over to Cindy Leo and Wendy Marone of Kids in Need of Defense. So ladies, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cindy. I am the State Policy Director at Kids in Need of Defense, KIND. And I'll have Wendy introduce herself really quick. Oh, Wendy, you're on mute.
Hi, everybody. My name is Wendy Miron, and I am the Senior Director for Social Services.
And next slide, please. So thank you all for joining us today. We do work at an agency called KIND. We are an international agency where our mission is a world, and our vision is a world in which children's rights and well-being are protected as they migrate alone in search of safety. Next slide, please. At this point in time, we are international, and we do have offices abroad, but we also have 10 offices, field offices within the US. And our work is to support migrant children in various ways through legal services, policy and advocacy, international programs, social services, and also family separation response that was formed to address the crisis created by the current administration's policy from the zero tolerance last year from family separation. Next slide, please. In terms of legal representation, the importance of our work was formed because that in immigration proceedings, there is no guarantee of counsel, particularly or even for children. And I think that Angela, illustrated that quite well earlier in that example about seeing children in court against trained government attorneys. And the impact of that is quite profound, whether you are represented or not. So the idea was to kind of even envision an ideal world where this is a very basic notion that someone may have access to counsel and be able to fight for their case. Next slide, please. We have served thousands of children. Sometimes some of their cases have more than one form of legal relief, which is a bit of the difference between clients and active matters. Our social services team, our social services component work in recognition that sometimes a legal decision itself is insufficient. So even if you're able to get someone work authorization or a green card, if that person doesn't have a safe space to stay at night, if they can't enroll in school, that they are fundamentally their well-being is fundamentally affected, and sometimes it also impacts their ability to proceed with their legal case. So the social services team was created, headed by Wendy, and was created in, I believe, the beginning of 2016. Next slide, please. And then we're gonna talk, we've talked a bit about this. I'm gonna move on to the next slide in the interest of time. We have some nice animation. Regarding our policy work is done at the international, federal, and also the state and local policy level. My role in particular is at the local and state policy level. This is to kind of acknowledge the different kinds of advocacy strategies that can occur in different spaces to address the type of outcomes, especially racialized outcomes, that result from an immigration system that is built and premised on exclusionary policies. As an agency that was originally premised on legal services and legal work, you know, our ability and our work with community organizations is extremely important. We aren't organizers, and we have seen the way that the power of their communities have in supporting unaccompanied children who do migrate alone to the US. And once they're released into communities, to kind of band around them and support the children. These children go to our schools. There's always this image that they're simply detained and locked up, but again, considering that these children are also in our schools, they play in our parks, they're part of our community, how can we support them? And the legal systems themselves sometimes are very narrowly focused. The solutions are very narrowly driven based off of the idea of needing more lawyers or having a test case. And while these things are very important tactics, they're insufficient. We really need to be working with community groups and people who care about supporting the children together and our clients, so that they are integrated into our community, that they have positive help-seeking experiences, that they can pursue and become part of our community, the opportunities that are afforded to them. So the questions that we typically ask over and over again in all of these systems that we operate in isn't just what is just, but who are you working for? What do the children and their youth want? What is the most important to them? And who do we work with? What do we do with our partners, and how do we work together? And I think that's a huge important part of this presentation, and kind of the questions that we're always thinking of every day to try to be creative on. Next slide, please. And regarding different kinds of policy, kind of advocacy work that we've done, in addition to language access, as we've mentioned on the previous slide, and working on state court policy issues would seem kind of more of a given. In particular, in recent times, a lot of local advocacy work that we've been working on, because again, that's where a lot of the impact is, where our clients have been released to, have been ensuring inclusive COVID recovery efforts. So providing testimony in Houston and working in California to make sure that the federal response had excluded a lot of immigrants, that there was other kind of ways to support them. Ensuring that there are existing solutions that have come up and been developed for the child welfare system and for foster youth, but ensuring that some of those protections are also inclusive and do not preclude our clients and immigrants who do not have legal status from getting further extended foster care support, et cetera, and things of the sort. Ensuring that children are supported with their digital issues related to telehealth, and also with distance learning, and supporting bills right now that are kind of clarifying those standards or reducing the barriers for access related to that. And also kind of local advocacy to get access to counsel as we fund these legal services in a way that are not restrictive in its ability to support undocumented individuals, especially unaccompanied children. And most recently, also even providing testimony in Boston on how to protect the confidentiality of children's information so that it is not given to immigration authorities, and doing that in partnership and following the leadership of other great community groups like the ones that Angela has mentioned as well. So those are just a few examples. I want to turn it over to Wendy, and feel free to always reach out to us. We're always very open for opportunities to collaborate. Again, I think the power lies best in this work together, so we really appreciate your time and your energy and your work.
Thank you, Cindy. So there's, our social services team, as Cindy mentioned, is fairly new at our organization. We started with 3 social service coordinators in 2016, and now we're a growing team of 17, soon to be 21. Next slide, please. And this is our team in 2019 during a retreat, but I just, I think centering the work in all of us is something that we take very serious, and we really promote a trauma-informed lens to the work and to the way that we provide support, and also just help the attorneys and the legal teams that we work very in collaboration with, so that we can all understand better what our clients' experiences are in a more holistic way. Next slide, please. This is just an overview of the scope of work of social service coordinators. We make sure that we really are taking into account the needs of the entire, excuse me, our entire clients, and really making sure that we're not losing sight of the strengths and the value, and uplifting their voices in every opportunity that we have, as well as working in collaboration with partners across all of the country. We have social service coordinators in each of the offices, and we have been able to continue to grow the team, and making sure that the programming that we identified as important is really rooted in the needs of the communities. For example, supports for clients in the Central Valley of California look very differently than the supports for clients in Boston or New York or Atlanta. We also make sure that we are providing our information and support to the legal teams, the pro bono mentors, and the attorneys that our clients work, so that they can also understand and gain better awareness of how to support and work with clients in a culturally responsive and holistic manner. And so that when they're addressing legal relief opportunities or options, they're also really thinking about what support networks do our clients have in the community. If there's any barriers in school, why are these barriers taking place, and making sure that we're always centering the needs around how to also change and address systemic challenges that create barriers for our clients. Next slide, please. And I'm just going to go really quickly. I mean, I can highlight the way that all of our team members in each of the offices have really mobilized and thought so creatively about how to respond to the pandemic and adapt, and in conjunction to how to adapt to their own needs as we all move to work remotely and support clients from our homes. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of Baltimore's partnership. Baltimore, the community in Baltimore, Black and Brown communities were significantly impacted by COVID at higher rates, and the resources available to them were very limited. Our social services team, in collaboration with the legal team, partnered with the emergency relief program that was led by the mayor's office, and this was able to ensure that families who did not qualify for the federal relief grants during this very critical period were able to also receive grants. They have also been building partnerships with other organizations. We're about to embark in a coalition work with the Baltimore Civic Fund. And through all of these opportunities, we've been able to ensure that clients who have lost their jobs, who might be themselves experiencing COVID or have a family member who is sick, are able to receive additional funds. Again, this is just one of the examples because we have a very short period of time, but this is something that our social service coordinators and legal teams have worked so creatively around, making sure that we can provide the supports that other systems are failing to include our clients in. Next slide, please. Another example that I thought was really significant to highlight, because I feel like it's critical for us to also counter some of the narratives around unaccompanied minors, and to also recognize that the experiences and challenges can also take place at the same time that connections and community is being built. The Boston team has really spearheaded an incredible small mentoring program that we hope to be able to pilot at other cities. 8 of the clients have partnered with volunteers in the community, and even during this very critical and difficult time for everybody, they have been able to, just have opportunities for sharing, supporting each other. They have gone on a kayaking experience, of course, maintaining social distance and, just making sure that they're safe, having shopping experiences together. One of the mentors shipped a book to one of the clients, and then they had a virtual dinner, and they were able to discuss the book that they read together. And this is so critical for many of our clients who might be reconnecting themselves with a sponsor or a family member or a distant relative that they haven't really met, and they don't really have that as many support as we know that are critical for young people to be able to succeed. The Boston example has been, I think, just really incredible, because during this remote time, they have been able to build opportunities to connect. And again, Boston was also another of the cities that was very highly impacted by our clients and the communities where they reside. We've also provided a lot of emergency funds and support. Next slide, please. And I think that it's very important to just really create the counter narratives for the young people that we work with. She's an example. Her name is Alejandra, and she's an example of someone who has been our client, had very challenging experiences as a young person, but she is now with a full scholarship at George Washington University, and has had the opportunity to meet Michelle Obama. And this is only one of our many thousands of clients that we have worked with, and who are really able to rewrite their own stories, regardless and despite everything that they have experienced at such a young age. Next slide, please. And I'm usually not a fast talker, so this is, I'm trying hard. This is just another image, so you can just, next slide. But just some examples of ways that we have been creative in supporting clients. We have started providing some in-house therapeutic supports in collaboration with art organizations that focus and center their voices on promoting young voices and ensuring that they're able to rewrite their stories. Recently, we completed a partnership with Arts Corps in Seattle, and this is just one of the images that one of the young participants shared. We had a celebration, and one of our participants called us from his work at a restaurant because he didn't want to miss the celebration, and he had us on speakerphone and send the images of some of the food that he had created or he had cooked that day. And somebody else shared an audio of something that he wrote. But this is just one of the many examples and ways that we are trying to be as creative and create connection with clients despite having to be remote. And then the last example is another collaboration. We've worked with Art Illusion now for the second time, and I just wanted to show a video. We had a virtual exchange program with 4 of the offices, so clients were able to meet for a group in while they were living in New Jersey, New York, Boston, and Atlanta. And this is the product of their video.
So, thank you, Wendy. Thank you so much. Touch it on. Thank you to you and to Cindy. I'm gonna just see if I can get it to go to the next slide here. My apologies. And so excited to hear from Liza. Bear with me just a moment. Here we go. Thank you so much, Wendy. And for those of you who have questions, please feel free to add them in the question box. We're going to turn it over to Liza for the next several moments, and then we'll come back for Q&A and we'll hear from everybody. So thank you so much, Liza.
Great. Thanks so much to all of you. Thanks, Rhonda. So my name is Liza Schwartzwald. I am one of 2 managers of education policy at the New York Immigration Coalition. So you could just hop to the next slide, Rhonda. Just the next slide, if you could. Thanks. So who we are the NYIC is an umbrella organization. We do policy and advocacy. So we are member-based. We have over 200 community-based organizations who all are fighting for rights for immigrants statewide in New York. So we do some state work, we do New York City work, and then we do occasionally some federal work too, as it sort of pops into our field of expertise. So our mission is to unite immigrants, members, and allies so all New Yorkers can thrive. So you can go ahead and hop to the next slide. So I just have a few numbers here. This slide and the next are just to get an idea of what New York actually looks like in terms of our immigrant population. 38% of New York City's population are immigrants, 52% of the businesses, 62% of households have at least one immigrant within their families, and 45% of the workforce is made up of immigrants. So when we talk about immigrants here, we are obviously talking about quite a few people. And then finally, as it relates to COVID, the most recent number I have is 54% of New York City's essential workers are immigrants. So of course that number got even bigger when we were talking about what happened here in New York City and state once COVID sort of hit. And then here's just a little number, a huge number really, $195 billion, which is actually how much immigrants contribute just to New York City's GDP. So just a number that we use sometimes to fight off this really harmful stereotype that that immigrants and undocumented people are not contributing. They obviously are, and they are not just contributing their work and their presence and their cultures, but also in fact, they are contributing to our state budget and city budget. You can go ahead to the next slide. So what I'm going to talk about mostly today is our New York United campaign. So the New York United campaign was the campaign that the NYIC came up with once COVID really happened. And here that happened, in early to mid-March. So we had to pivot very hard to really address what was going on there. And we really saw the need for this campaign to figure out how we could help our families that were dealing with immediate financial hardship, and to really recognize that our immigrant communities were and became among the hardest hit in terms of health outcomes and just really all outcomes. So we came up with the New York United campaign to pull together all the threads of our COVID relief work within our overall NYIC budget and campaign priorities to ensure that our immigrant families could survive the COVID crisis, but also that all of the wonderful programs that we've fought for in the last, however many years really survived this experience as well. So this was a project that really just tied together all of that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the strategies that we used as we sort of went through this work. We do work on all sorts of fronts. I do education, we have health, legal services, we do a lot of census work. We worked on the Green Light Project, which was driver's licenses for immigrants in the last couple of years, and happily won that last year. So this is how we do the work. So in COVID, for the New York United, for COVID response, really our first sort of strategy, I suppose, was rapid response. Our organization really came together and started doing daily and weekly updates for all of our member organizations and really beyond our members. On all of the campaign areas that we work on. Of course, health was a big one, education as well, legal services, all of that kind of went into that. So we did those on every day. We released one at about 4 o'clock for the next day, and then we did a lot of weekly updates and communication, both from our end to disperse information to our members, but also listening back from our members to make sure that we were addressing all of the things that they needed addressed and they needed information on. So next, we really do a lot of activating of our membership organizations. One of the greatest strengths that we have as the NYIC is our member organizations. They are, they are really where the direct services happen. We do a lot of the policy and advocacy middle ground work, but our members work directly in our communities. So they're the ones that are telling us, here's what our families need, here's what we need to address. And then we can turn around and make sure that both they're getting the information they need, but also that we can say, hey, you need to show up, or you can show up at this particular event or in this particular legislative meeting, or all the different opportunities that they have to then, make sure that their folks are getting involved. And they always do. So that's sign-on letters, that's campaigns, that's meetings. Fundraising was a big one actually this year. Of course, fundraising is always part of the nonprofit world, but we really realized during this time that there were new things that needed to be funded really immediately, like our emergency cash assistance. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, so I won't dive into it here. But we did have to make a pretty big pivot there in what kind of things we were fundraising for. Grassroots advocacy. Our members showed up virtually and in person to all sorts of meetings, and they really used their voices to talk about what issues they were facing, what they needed, and did their part to amplify, I think, the voices of communities that were really not being heard in this particular moment, especially given the digital divide that occurred during this time. Our immigrant communities tend to be a lot less, have a lot less access to both digital devices and digital literacy. So that was an issue. And then, of course, grassroots. We can't leave out the Defund NYPD campaign, the whole series of marches that happened here. We were involved in those as well. For direct advocacy, we really, during the budget season, this hit during our city budget season, we really shifted everything virtually, as everyone did. Went ahead and did virtual lobby days, had phone calls to council members, sent a whole lot of emails, and really reached out and utilized the different programs that our members run to make sure that we were getting like students and adult literacy students and people who were affected by these things into these meetings, which even in person can be very difficult, but with the additional remote aspect really, became even more so. And then we have administrative advocacy on the education team. This is a big portion of the work we do. We work very frequently with the Department of Education here in New York City to make sure that we are communicating with them about the different needs that our students are facing, and to make sure that things like the digital devices that the DOE was giving out were actually getting to the students who needed them. And then finally, there's legal, which is something we don't do quite as much of, but where necessary, we sue. So last year, for example, we were one of the plaintiffs on the case that removed the citizenship question from the census. So where those kinds of situations occur, we also will take the legal route. So you can switch to the next slide. The good news is that these policies actually and strategies worked quite well. Of course, there was much more work to be done, but I have here listed some of the wins we got. In the beginning, there was free COVID testing, evaluation, and treatment for all low-income people, regardless of immigration status, which was a question in the beginning of this. There was direct grants to small businesses. There was a lot of work that we've done on the public charge front to identify healthcare, nutrition, and other programs, make sure that folks understood what might trigger a public charge hearing, and make sure that that information was accurate, because we had a lot of fear in our communities over that work. And then on the education front, of course, we were able to get like summer regents exams suspended. So that normally would be required testing for students to move to the next grade level. We were able to get those suspended. So those are just a couple of the wins that we were looking at. And then you can flip to the next page. So this is something that we were really excited about, our emergency cash grant program. So as you all, I'm sure, know, the federal stimulus package did not include a stimulus check for our immigrant families. So while all the rest of us got a little bit, they didn't get anything. So one of the ways that we pivoted really quickly, and I think very successfully, was to actually within our own organization raise and distribute, at this point the number is 2.7 million, it might even be higher now, but $2.7 million to over 5,000 New Yorkers. So we raised that money, created a grant process for our member organizations, and then those organizations were able to give $500 gift cards directly to families to help them, no strings attached, just with food, with rent, whatever they needed. So this was something that we were really proud of, just in terms of how where we were seeing and hearing a need, and we were able to really directly try to meet that need. You can go ahead to the next one. And then I'll talk a little bit about education policy and advocacy, since this is in fact my own area. So it's my favorite one to talk about, but I also think it's a really great example of all of the different kinds of work that the strategies that I had talked about earlier. So, you know, COVID-19's arrival had obviously profoundly compounded all of the challenges that immigrant youth and parents have been facing. And as a result, we've really hit this sort of existential crisis and are at risk of really leaving like an entire generation, really generations of immigrants behind. This is an early childhood issue, a K through 12 issue, and an adult literacy issue. And remote learning has really not worked, unfortunately, for so many immigrant families, because parents haven't been able to access English language skills, the technology that they need. They don't have the systems navigation skills that are necessary. So for all of those reasons, a lot of our youth, really from the very earliest levels into high school, are really at risk of losing a whole year of education. So when all of this occurred in the very beginning, and we hit March, and all of a sudden it looked like we were going to have to move New York's massive 1.1 million student education system from in-person to remote, we had to figure out as an organization how best we can do this. This is my colleague, Kirk. And so we went ahead and just dived right into it. In addition to the daily updates that we were doing organizationally, we also had education daily updates. Things were changing incredibly rapidly here. So we began hosting weekly calls with the New York City Department of Education to provide timely feedback and troubleshooting for members. So that's something we're still doing. So there were weeks when we had multiple calls with the DOE. This particular call we hold once a week is actually a great opportunity for our all of our partners, not just our members, but just New York City organizations in general that are working with education, to really give the DOE instant feedback on the work that they're doing and what their families need. So this was crucial when we were dealing with the digital device divide and a number of other issues. We pivoted existing projects like the LIFE project, which we worked on with now, to make sure that the work that we were doing in that group was also stretching out to the kinds of things that our families needed, like access to food and resources and up-to-date information about what was happening. And then finally, we, with our both grassroots advocacy and direct legislative advocacy, we were able to protect nearly all of the adult literacy funding in both the state and the city budget, which is at risk always, even in a good year. And in this year, when the New York budgets were hit so hard with COVID, was especially at risk. So you can go to the next slide. And so here are a few more wins that we've had actually just in the past week that I wanted to make sure that we uplifted. There was a language access law in Long Island that we were able to get passed. New York's automatic voter registration bill just passed both houses, so that's headed for the governor, and we're thinking that one's going to pass. There's our citizenship question. And then we got Protect Our Courts passed, which makes it unlawful for any law enforcement officer, including ICE, to arrest a person who is attending a court hearing. And that we think was going to include actually the whole, like from your door to the courts and back. So that is a huge win. And then the next slide, which I think is the final slide, is just some Census 2020 updates. We do work on the census. I'm sure you all saw the horrible memo that the administration released last week saying that only citizens are to be considered in population figures. We filed a lawsuit just a few days ago to get an injunction on that particular memo. And this week is Census our Census Week of Action in New York City. So we are working really hard to make sure that all of our families, immigrants and otherwise, are counted. And then just a final thing that we heard last night, actually, or yesterday, is that the U.S. District Court in New York, for another case we were involved in, just issued a temporary injunction against the Trump administration's changes to the Department of Homeland Security's public charge rule. So that public charge rule will not be in effect during the COVID-19 national emergency. So those are all some hopefully a positive way to end this. And the final slide is just a couple of resources. A wonderful immigrant eligibility chart for public benefits that our health team came up with, which right now actually we can go on pause. And then just a much more specific breakdown of all of the different things that the New York United campaign had covered, which I had nowhere near enough time to discuss in this 12 minutes. And then our education policy. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Liza, and I'd like to welcome everybody back. Wendy, Angela, and Cindy, welcome you all back. It's amazing how this hour just flies by. I think we left some time for questions, but I do want to get to a couple of questions, and I'll just ask that we try and be brief. We may go a minute or so over, but all of this will be recorded and we'll be posting and sharing. So a question, Angela, for you specifically, it says you talked about bail, but how many people detained by ICE have you been able to get released from actual detention? And that was specifically to you, Angela.
Sure. So in the immigration court, people will be given bond, and it's through our bond fund that we're able to help pay those bonds to get people released. I think our latest number is like around 230 bonds that we have directly paid or helped to pay to get that number of folks out of immigration jail and back with their families and communities. Sometimes families are able financially to pay the bond, but not logistically, because there are threats to them going to the ICE office physically to make the payment, and a lot of complications and like helping someone get a ride once they're released from the ICE office, wherever they're going next. So we've helped to pay about 230 bonds, and then there's hundreds more that we haven't tracked where there's been a bond process that we've been trying to support people in those kind of like logistical hurdles to get their loved one out of detention immediately. There's other processes that we support people in terms of getting released through parole, and some people through the legal status that they achieve in court leads to a release. So there are other ways that folks get out in addition to bond, but that has really been the focus of our bond fund.
Thank you, Angela. I have another question. I'm not exactly sure if it's directed at anyone in particular, but let's check it out. It says, can you say a little bit about how you communicated with vulnerable populations about the public charge? I think there continues to be a lot of misinformation. So who would like to jump in and talk about that one real quick?
I guess I discussed it a little, so I could hop in. So yeah, we actually brought on a fellow whose job was just to deal with public charge, and our health team really did a lot of that. So we worked on making sure that we had a lot of like multilingual explanations of public charge. We worked, our fellow and then our health team did a whole bunch of trainings with our membership, with our member organizations to really make sure that they understood what this meant and what this didn't mean. We did topic-specific public charge documents. So for example, we had one for education that said, hey, if you're an adult literacy program or you're a K-12 program and you're dealing with questions on public charge, here's a list of exactly what counts as public charge. Here are the relevant programs you run that are not going to trigger public charge, so that they could explicitly say, this is not something you have to worry about. So those were a few of the ways that we did that. And then of course, we sued, but yeah, but there's, I think it's been ongoing. We really do a lot of communicating with our member organizations, find out what kinds of questions they're getting, and then have tried to gear the information towards those questions. So pointing out exactly what things don't don't trigger public charge assessments has been, I think, crucial in terms of having those discussions and making sure that the programs understand that as well.
Thank you, Liza. I'm going to squeeze in one more question, and then we are going to figure out a way to continue this on our blog and on the forum. But this question I would like to send to Cindy and Wendy. What intergenerational initiatives and policies exist to address anti-Blackness in the immigration system? This is a question from someone who couldn't join us today, but says, I think working with children and caretakers simultaneously can be very effective.
Sure. I can tackle from the social services perspective. I mean, right now within Accompaniment Minors, we work, our clients are the young youth that we work with, that we serve, but we have been discussing as part of our in-house therapeutic supports and just other ways of opportunities to connect to the whole social system or like social network that the clients have, and definitely anti-Blackness. And I think just experiences of, I think, internalized racism that we bring from our communities back home in different home countries are something that we are definitely committed to addressing and just bringing up. And part of some of our collaborations that we've had, like we have started having those conversations, not with the sponsors, but just with the young people. But it's an area that I am, my background is working in family engagement and including the families, and it's something that I've been at Kind for a year, but I'm looking really forward to being able to bring those voices of the whole family and the support systems that the young people have. I don't know, Cindy, if you have anything else to add from the policy perspective.
No, that's great, Wendy. And just kind of on a personal note, not that we can take credit for this in any way, there's been a lot of community efforts to translate things like an open letter regarding Black Lives Matter in various languages for young people to be able to use and give to family members that I've actually personally used and other people have, and having that ability to kind of, I think the question was multi-generational kind of education as well. So that's another resource that I would encourage people to look up as well.
Thank you. I want to thank you all so much for spending time with us today. I know the time just ran out. So we will continue this via our blogs, via our podcast. I'd love to have you all back. Folks, there are some additional announcements about the summit. Make sure to register. Check out today's podcast, anywhere you get your podcast in the Arena with Now. Join us on the forum. Everything will be posted, recorded. It's available at networksofopportunity.org. And again, if you're interested in the Child Wellbeing Tracker, take a look at the survey and the message that you'll get following this webinar for more details. Thank you, Angela, Wendy, Cindy, Liza, for spending time with us today. We sincerely appreciate you. Have a great rest of your day. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.